Okay, now everything is ready. And first of all, Mark, welcome and thank you very, very much for joining us. Hello.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Um, Mark, and first, very good to hear you again because, and I also thank you to Fatos Floyd to introduce me to you. Fatos abla, welcome also. Maybe she couldn't hear you.
Ben kendi bir sesini kapattım da Mark konuşsun diye çok sevinçliyim hep beraber olduğumuz için bugün.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Fatoş abla. Arkadaşlar umarım çeviriyi duyabiliyorsunuzdur şu an. Duyuyorsa bir kişi sadece... Tamam. Okay, no problem. They can hear the translation. Mark, okay, we heard many things about NFP and it was a very honorable for me. I attended the convention in 2015 in I think, and there are many things we hear. But first of all, can you introduce yourself and NFP a little bit? And if you wish, you can start anything from you wish.
All right. Well, great. Thank you. I had some notes based on what you asked me to talk about, and I was just going to dive into those. Does that work for you?
Yeah. No problem. You can start whatever you wish, and I will. Sometimes I will ask some questions, and our participants will have questions, and like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Mark Riccobono, and I do serve as president of the National Federation of the Blind. And it's a honor to have the opportunity to be with you to talk about the nature of what we do in the National Federation of the Blind. And there are a lot of topics I could talk about. So, if there are questions, feel free to jump in with those. My plan was, and I was asked to talk a little bit about the nature of the organized blind movement in the United States, and that means the National Federation of the Blind. I was going to talk some about our recent efforts as a movement, in addition to the history, and was planning to leave plenty of time for questions. So I do appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you all this afternoon. The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because we recognize that low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams, that you can live the life you want, and that blindness is not what holds you back. Now, to start, let me say that when I use the word blind, I mean anybody with significant vision loss. Historically, in programs for blind people, there has been a class system based on how much people can see. In the United States, typically people use the term visually impaired, sometimes partially sighted. We believe that blind people are a class of people and that we should not divide the class based on how much remaining vision someone has.
Yeah.
We believe that the societal barriers, the negative attitudes about blindness are as true for people who are totally blind as they are for people with some remaining vision. So when you hear me use the word blind, I don't necessarily mean people who are totally blind.
Yeah.
Likewise, you'll hear me use the term non-visual access, and that generally refers to the techniques that blind people use to access websites or the environment, so that it doesn't it doesn't mean that it doesn't include things like large print or a zoom magnification. It's just, I use that term broadly to mean the kind of access that blind people need. Okay, so the National Federation of the Blind was founded in 1940. And in fact, Monday, this coming Monday, the 16th, is
Yeah,
our
yeah,
80th
I read about it. It
anniversary.
is your birthday,
Yeah,
16
that's right.
November.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right. It's coming
and
up.
very good.
Yeah.
Happy New Year's, I think.
So it's our anniversary, and our understanding of blindness as a movement has really been built even before the founding of our organization. Our understanding of blind people is driven by the hopes and dreams of blind people, but up until the founding of our organization, and through the centuries, really, the understanding of blindness was driven by myth and misconception. And I mean, you all know the story as well as I do, but throughout history, throughout classic literature, blindness has been viewed as a significant tragedy, or bestowing on blind people some amazing superpowers, both of which, of course, are not true. But from that comes a lot of myths and misconceptions that have caused society more broadly to think negatively about blind people. Before the founding of our organization in the United States, what happened with blind people was driven by agencies for the blind. So basically, charitable organizations who made it their life's mission. Sometimes they're referred to it as God's work to help the blind. And unfortunately, those agencies, more often than not, help to reinforce the stereotypes about us and to create systems to hold us back. What started to happen in the United States is that blind people came together to start to form state-based organizations of blind people. Usually, oftentimes they were based on people who had graduated from a school for the blind in the state. But blind people started to come together in state-based organizations and started to develop local organizations that were led by blind people. And leaders started to develop the idea that really we did need a movement of blind people to help redefine blindness in our society. At the same time, in the 1930s, the United States government became much more involved in programs that had a broad impact on blind people, including employment efforts, and as well establishing in America the Social Security Administration, which presented an opportunity to give blind people a basic level of independence and living wage that they could use to get on their feet. But, in the United States, we have 50 states, and it didn't make sense to have blind people in the state of Maryland, where I am, advocating for one thing, while the blind people in California advocated for something else with the federal government. The blind leaders at the time recognized that in order to get maximum advantage out of the federal government programs, we needed to have a movement that operated on a nationwide basis. And so we formed an organization with the core values that we still have today, which is that the blind speak for themselves through representative leaders who have been elected by blind people, not non-blind people who have appointed themselves to represent blind people. we founded our organization, and it's still true today, that it's a democratically run organization based on the will of our membership, which is largely blind people. We do allow non-blind people to be members of our organization. However, the majority of our membership must be blind, and in the Federation, definitely well over 90% of our members are blind people. And our elected leaders, our board of directors, must be made up of blind people. And in some of our local affiliates, the entire board does not have to be blind, but the majority of the board has to be blind, and the president and vice presidents have to be blind people. So it's very clear that we are led by blind people. Now, for our national organization, which coordinates all the work of our local affiliates, 100% of the board members have to be blind people, and they have to be members of the organization. The organization meets on an annual basis at our annual convention. I'm glad you were at our 2015 convention. That was our 75th anniversary. Is one of our best conventions ever. The annual convention is our is really the guiding force for the organization. We call it the supreme authority. It really serves as the legislature for our organization. It has final ruling on all matters of policy. The National Convention elects the national board, and our convention typically meets in person, but this year we met virtually. I hope that some of you had the opportunity to join us in our virtual convention, and we still had the convention conduct business. We had blind people registered to vote in our elections and determine policy from all around the country. So the convention is our supreme authority, and it makes it clear that blind people run this organization. We make the decisions about what happens with blind people in this country, and that's really the heart and soul of who we are as an organization. And having a national organization allowed us, starting in the 1940s, to start to advocate for things like having a basic level of support from the government so that blind people had a fair chance to get out of the care of their families into their own situations to begin to build their own lives. Now, from there, we moved on to work on employment and civil rights and so many other aspects of life. And, we scrapped up from the bottom. We were very much not paid attention to as blind people at the beginning in 1940. Today, we lead the way in this country. Nothing happens related to blind people without the National Federation of the Blind, and we innovate a lot of what happens for blind people in this country. You can read the history of our first 50 years in a book called Walking Alone and Marching Together. It's on our website, which is nfb.org. And it's there in text, and it's also, the audio is available. And I would encourage you to read that content. It tells a lot about our development and history as a movement. And I know what your association is trying to do is in a similar spirit to what the Federation has done. And I think you can learn a lot from it. I certainly don't have time today to go through all of our historical moments and achievements, but I think the outline of what we've done is important. One, yeah, go ahead.
We read many articles from Kenneth Jernigan or the speech of Kenneth Jernigan.
Nice.
He has a very fantastic ideas. And arkadaşlar Şebnem and Faruk, if you wish, you can change. I want to ask in here, you have a very good motto. This is live the life you want. Would you like to talk about this a little bit more? What do you mean by live the life you want?
Well, it's a good transition. Yeah, to what I was going to mention next. You've mentioned the writings of Kenneth Jernigan, and one of the things that
pardon, Mark, there is a loudness coming from a microphone. It is coming from you, or
no? It's not from me. Someone else must be unmuted.
Okay. Şebnem, sen sus, Faruk konuşmaya devam etsin. Okay.
Az evvel aynı anda konuştum.
Okay. Mark, continue. I will solve it. Okay, no problem.
Okay. So what I was going to say is, in addition to building an organization, an important part of what we have done is to try to share the understanding of blindness that comes from the authentic experience of blind people. And that's beginning to share what we call our philosophy about blindness. Philosophy is a pattern of thought, and our organization has worked on changing the pattern of thought about blindness in society. Kenneth Jernigan's writings are obviously an important part of that, but it's not just our leaders. It also is the authentic writings of a diverse array of blind people from different perspectives who come together to share what's normal for blind people, because of course we know that what the rest of society thinks about blindness is really not consistent with our experience. So I'm glad that you all have discovered and enjoyed articles like Handicapper Characteristic, important speech.
I gave lectures in Boğaziçi University, Mark, and I always give that article, handicap or characteristic article, to my students. It was a very fascinating and very changing article, perception changing article.
So, even today, we continue to, the philosophy continues to evolve and grow. And we think about it on a daily basis, because the reality is society around us is changing. And we live in a digital age now, so it challenges us to continue to evaluate our philosophy and whether it's still true and consistent. It also helps us grow as an organization. So you asked about our tagline, live the life you want. And it shows part of the evolution of our organization. Our tagline used to be changing what it means to be blind. And we still do that. But we recognize that we have also advanced as an organization. And when we thought about how to express what we do and why we do it, we came up with live the life you want, because that's what we do on a daily basis. We help blind people understand that they can pursue their hopes and dreams. They don't have to be locked into what the non-blind population believes is possible. And live the life you want means we have the freedom and opportunity to pursue what's important to us and to stretch the limits of what's perceived for blind people. It also speaks to the fact that we get to direct our own destiny. Live the life you want was also intended to make it very clear that we're not done yet. We need more blind people to participate actively in our movement. And so it was intended to welcome people in. Changing what it means to be blind makes it sound a little bit like we have it done, we have it under control. And we need every blind person, certainly in the United States, to be part of what we're doing. I should, pause to also say, this presentation is important to you because we have always had the shared understanding that it's important for us to share with blind people all over the world. Our focus is in the U.S. There's still a lot of work to be done in the United States, even though we have made significant progress. But going back to 1964, and even a little bit before that, we've recognized that the world stage is an important place for sharing amongst blind people. So in 1964, our first president, Jacobus Tenbroek, helped to create the International Federation of the Blind, which was a major effort to organize blind people from different nations to come together. That organization later became melded into what today is the World Blind Union. And of course, today, the World Blind Union is currently led by Dr. Fred Schroeder, who is a member of ours, a longtime member of the Federation. And so a lot of our international engagement happens through the World Blind Union activities. And in 2016, we hosted the meeting of the World Blind Union in Orlando. And that's primarily where we support efforts around the world. But as has been pointed out, our website is available. We welcome you to enjoy and benefit from all that the content that we create. And, it's our hope by engaging in meetings like this with you that we learn something as well about how to continue to build the hopes and dreams for blind people. And I hope that besides visiting our website, I hope another day will come. I know it will, where more of you might be able to come to our national convention, which happens every summer, and or visit our national headquarters here in Baltimore, Maryland. So I was asked also to talk about technology.
Yeah.
And
before placing up technology, Mark, many people remember you in Turkey from what you guess? It is the blind driver challenge. We were very affected from that project. I think in 2011, like that. I don't know exact, or it was 2004. I am not sure the exact date, but we localized your video, we made audio description and many people know you from that project.
Yeah, well, it's a good story about technology, and it's a fun thing to share. So the Federation has long worked on setting a standard for equal access for blind people in society. And the beauty of the technological age is that technology is ones and zeros. It's not inherently visual or auditory. It's ones and zeros, and it's all about how you build it. And we have consistently fought for the idea that if you build it correctly, we will be included. And more importantly, if you build it with our perspective included, that we believe from our experience that the innovation will be even better. And we know that some innovations that have been made for blind people have become mainstream. Now, we've been working on technology as an organization since, probably the early 70s. The first project that we did was with Ray Kurzweil to build the first reading machine for blind people in the 1970s. And so reading technology has always been of interest. In the 1990s, recognizing what was happening with technology, we started really actively pursuing this idea of equal access in technology, including starting to use the court system of the United States to demand equal access from manufacturers of technology. Not just websites, but also physical technologies. So we started with ATM machines, figuring that blind people want to get their money out of the bank too. And we started by suing the banks. And we said it was their responsibility to provide accessible machines to get the money out. And the banks said, well, wait a minute, we can't buy machines that are accessible. We can only buy the machines that the folks produce. So we said, okay. So we went and sued the manufacturers. And the manufacturers said, well, wait a minute, the banks never request accessible machines. So we got caught in this loop until we found a manufacturer who said, well, sure, we'll make accessible machines, no problem. And we got it to be the standard in the United States, both through the law and really through the reality of what's happening, that, you know, if there's a bank machine today, it's going to be accessible. But we learned from that process that we have to work at all levels of accessibility, not just the folks delivering it to the marketplace, but also the people producing it. Then websites come along, and of course, websites, especially over the last 20 years, have become an important part of commerce. And in 2020, they're essential, since most real physical businesses aren't easily accessible. So we've been working on the standard of web accessibility, both how to do it and that it's required. And we started by going after websites that had a physical store location associated with them, but now we've gotten it, we still have some work to do in the US to get the idea that all websites should be accessible, even if they're not linked to a physical store. We bring web accessibility cases and we win them. And what we've learned is that it's one thing to make a website accessible. The important thing is that we get corporations to sustain that accessibility. So
very right, yeah.
Not just fix it today, because we know that tomorrow they're going to update the website and they're going to break it. So we have to get them to build the systems internally, the practices to keep it up. Okay, so in that effort, we thought, well, we want to really push this idea that blind people are an important part of the innovation process. So about 20 years ago, we started to think about opening a research and training institute, which we did right here in Baltimore at our national headquarters. And we thought, if we're going to open a research and training institute, if we're going to put blind people in the middle of research and in the middle of innovation, we need a big idea. And our president at the time, Mark Maurer, started to talk to people about, why can't we build a car that a blind person can drive? And everybody thought this idea was crazy, including me, by the way. You know, we all grew up with the idea that we're blind people, we're never going to drive. You have to be able to see to drive. That's the whole premise of driving, at least in the United States, is you have to pass an eye test and you have to be able to look out the windshield. But he started to push this idea. Why, if we as blind people have the ability to think and react, to synthesize information, why can't we build a car that blind people can drive? How do we know it's not possible until we test it? How do we know? So that set us on a journey of trying to inspire and engage engineers to think about how to build non-visual interfaces for a car, which is a really hard problem. But engineers, innovators, they love hard problems, right? The easy ones aren't so interesting to them. And the goal was to spark development and to have people thinking about innovative interfaces for blind people. Now, a lot of people thought this idea was way too far out there. They didn't want to try it. And that was until we found Virginia Tech, which is a university not too far from our national headquarters. Excuse me. They did a lot of robotics work, and they had a program for building cars, autonomous vehicles, so cars that drive themselves. And they said, well, we could do this project. We could build a car. We build autonomous vehicles, and we can put a blind person in the back seat and push a button and declare victory. And we said, well, wait a minute. We don't want a car that drives us. We want to be able to drive the car. We want to be able to make driving decisions. We want to be able to crash the car. They said, you want to crash the car? We said, well, we don't want to crash the car, obviously, but if there's nothing for the blind person to do, if there's not the actual possibility of crashing the car, then what's the point? We don't want to be driven around. We want to build technologies that help us utilize our skills and test the limits of what's possible. And so we worked together on that. We actually started by building a little dune buggy project and with some blind students. And we kind of to test the model that we could build interfaces that would allow blind people to drive. And we had 16-year-olds or so blind youth drive this little red dune buggy around a parking lot. That was to kind of prove that we could actually develop something. From there, we decided we were going to put it into a real car. And in order to hold ourselves accountable and our partners from Virginia Tech, we started by announcing that we were going to do the first public demonstration in January 2011.
Yeah.
We hadn't even tested the technology yet, but we believed that it was possible. Now, we didn't announce what we were going to do. We just believed it was possible and said we were going to do it. And we started testing the technology. And all of our engineers from Virginia Tech were not blind people. And so we said, okay, well, we need to put blind people into the center of this. Blind people have to be fully engaged in all aspects of what happens. And it was an important notion, our working together, because the non-blind engineers had a certain idea of how things should be. And it was based on their own bias about blindness. Mm-hmm. And our authentic experience as blind people gave us insights into what to do. So just as an example, we built these interfaces into a vehicle, and in order to test them, we used a test road in Virginia that's typically used for testing highway transportation technologies. And the engineers wanted us to drive first very slow and in a wide driving lane, much wider than the typical driving lane. Well, I'm sure all of you, if you've had any degree of training and traveling as a blind person, if you've gotten out and traveled, you might have enough experience to know what I know, which is, as a blind person, it's harder to walk in a straight line when you walk slow. Yeah. That's why we promote blind people using very long canes, because the faster you walk, the easier it is to walk straight. Well, the same principle is true for driving. It's much harder to drive straight slow than it is at speed. And so we were having a lot of trouble with the technology. And finally we said, look, just let us drive at a normal speed and we'll drive straighter. And what happened? we drove straighter. That's just one example.
Very good.
So what happened is, because we were authentically involved, we got the technology to do things that the engineers did not expect, because they were used to a model of looking out the window. In fact, they told us that in order to have someone test this technology, it would be better if we had a blind person who had driven before when they were sighted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we rejected that idea. And in fact, what we found was that having driven before didn't really matter. It was more skill and an ability to utilize and understand the technology. One of my colleagues here at our national office, Neil, was one of the other test drivers. He had driven before. He was sighted. He lost his vision from RP. He had a lot of driving experience. I had none. I grew up blind, losing my vision from glaucoma, so I was never eligible to drive. Both of us were equally as talented with the technology. In the process, we learned a lot about how to think about technology, and mostly we learned we don't know where the limits are for blind people. And if you've watched the video of the Blind Driver Challenge, I think you know that's true as well. We don't know where the limits are for blind people anymore. We're not afraid to test the limits. And in the case of the Blind Driver Challenge, we didn't know what was possible. We just believed it was possible, and then said, we can't say it's not until we test it. And we tested it and found out, in fact, it is possible. Now, let me give you some technical details, which I haven't. The technologies that we used. If you're familiar at all with cars that drive themselves, today we sometimes call them automated vehicles in the US, sometimes autonomous vehicles, sometimes self-driving cars. There's three levels of things that happen. First of all, those vehicles have sensors on the outside, oftentimes redundant sensors to track positioning, LiDAR, which is a type of laser that captures data about what's in the environment, often GPS, sometimes visual cameras. So that's stage one. The technology, all of these things, all this information about the vehicle and where it's positioned in space is gathered through these sensors. Phase two is all of that information is fused together in a computer somewhere in the vehicle. And the computer builds a world map of the vehicle, where it is in space and and predicts where it might go. And for that matter, where it's safe to go or if there's obstacles in the way. In autonomous vehicles, stage three is that the computer makes a decision about what to do. And then it does it or doesn't do it. It stops or turns or something. It's stage three that we were interested in. So for our project, stage one and stage two were the same. It's just when we took data from the computer, we didn't let the computer make the decision. We needed a way to communicate information about the driving environment to the blind person, and these are the non-visual interfaces. The interfaces that we created were very simple, actually. We used a set of gloves that had vibrating motors in them, and we put vibrating motors in the seat cushion. And with just these two simple interfaces and training, obviously, you can't just get in and know what to do. You got to train with the technology. A blind person was able to learn how to use the technology, how to interpret the environment, and how to make driving decisions, sometimes in some pretty interesting ways. We had to rent a racetrack in order to test the technology. And using the technology for a while, you could actually anticipate features of the road using the technology. which is not something that the sighted engineers had expected. And interestingly enough, when the road is wet, those features change because the sensors perceive the road differently because of the water. So that was almost 10 years ago, right? January.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to that project, or what are you doing about automation car like that?
Yeah.
Do you have any project?
Yeah, I knew that was going to be a question.
Yeah.
So we recognized in 2011 that the idea of blind people driving was interesting, and we were certainly interested in it. It was going to take a lot of money and a lot more research to actually get a product that you could sell to blind people, and more importantly, to get the driving laws changed so that blind people could use that product on the American roads.
Max, sorry, translators, if you wish, you can change. If you wish, Shebnem, you can talk, and Faruk, maybe you can rest up a little bit. Okay. Go on, Mike.
It's okay. You give me a chance to have some water. So we recognized that it was gonna be a lot of expense to continue with that project. However, we also recognized that the environment for developing vehicles that drive themselves was really heating up. Google was one of the first to really push on it in the United States. Other parts of the world, obviously Mobileye is a big one. There's others, and we recognize that the Blind Driver Challenge was an opportunity for the court.
Amerika'daki mahkeme sisteminden mesela dava açtıkları.
Birinin mikrofonu mu açık arkadaşlar? Okay, go on, go on.
Stick our nose in and say, if we're going to have vehicles that drive themselves, they have to be accessible from day one to blind people. That means blind person has to be able to get into the vehicle and know what the vehicle's doing, know where it is, be able to use the controls without being able to see. And the reason that we're able to get credibility in that conversation was because of the Blind Driver Challenge. Had we not done that work, I'm confident, because of the work that we've done now, that people would have said, well, it's nice, we'll get around to you, we always get around to you, don't worry, and once we get this technology worked out for everybody else, we'll make sure it's safe enough for you. Because we did this project, we have been in at the basic level from the beginning on automated vehicles in the United States. We have participated in all of the significant meetings. The National Federation of the Blind has been represented alongside the U.S. Department of Transportation in releasing standards related to accessibility and the development of standards for automated vehicles in this country. And we, as an organization, have actually brokered meetings between the industry and other disability organizations. We've actually helped to bring other disabilities to the table to talk about this. And we've kept the automated vehicle industry very focused on what happens inside the vehicle. A lot of people want to get distracted by, for example, how difficult it's going to be for a blind person to find the automated vehicle. Now, we continue to tell people, if there's an autonomous vehicle outside waiting for me, I'm going to find it. Don't worry about that, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a car outside, I don't want to get into it and then have to call my neighbor to program the car to go where I want. And then they say, well, you'll be able to talk to the car. And I'm sure, you know, you all have had the opportunity to play with technologies that you get to talk to. They only work part of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talking to technology presumes, first of all, that you can listen to it usually, and that you can talk. You know, I mean, if you're sick and you don't have a voice, you need another way to tell a vehicle what you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't hear, you know, you need a way to interface with the vehicle that's not auditory. And if you're a deaf blind person, it can't be only auditory. You need a way to have tactile access. So we've been in at the beginning. We know that automated vehicles are coming. They're coming fast. We're excited about it. We believe, and I think it's a reality, that blind people are going to get there faster than we ever would have without the Blind Driver Challenge. So I think that's the legacy of the Blind Driver Challenge. And I think we all can be proud of that.
Okay, a very good project. We are expecting if till the end of life. I hope we would have. Mark, I have a few questions that maybe we should go to our attendees. One of them, we know that in US there is a very good disability rights movement starting from 1960s. We know the Civil Rights Movement, the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, 1990 ADA, and there are many disability groups, especially physically impaired wheelchair group, are fighting with. And what is your relation with other disability groups? What are you doing with them? Do you have any meetings or other things? And what the blind, how the blind community stays in those right movements of all disabled group in US?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. We have been very careful as a movement to make it clear that our expertise is blind people.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't speak for any other disabilities, and they don't speak for us. We have said we have an organization of blind people, and the broad disability movement doesn't get to say what works for us without us. That has historically sometimes created trouble, because the broad disability movement has felt like we're trying to be separate from other people with disabilities. And we haven't been. It's just that, you know, what blind people need is specific and different than what someone who's a quadriplegic needs, right? There is sometimes overlap, but, you know, where we spend a lot of time pushing on accessibility to websites, other people with disabilities, that's not their primary concern. So we have worked very hard over the years to, what we like to say, using another driving analogy, stay in our lane, right? We speak on behalf of blind people and for issues related to blind people. We have gotten to a place, though, where we coordinate with other disability rights organizations. And when I say that, specifically our interest is other disability-run organizations. So other organizations that are run by people with disabilities, not for people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, we have what's called the National Disability Leadership Alliance. This is not an official organization. It's just a loose collaborative of organizations like ours that are run by people with disabilities, where we agree to come together, share information, share ideas, share priorities, Once in a while, we have letters to Congress or to government agencies around specific issues that we sign on to. We're very clear amongst us that the association does the alliance does not get to speak for any of the other organizations. So, the National Disability Leadership Alliance can't decide it's going to take a position and claim that it is the position of the National Federation of the Blind. Only our organization can take positions. So, once in a while, there's an issue that comes up amongst other disability organizations. And it's not that we're against it. We just say we're not going to sign on to it because it's not a direct impact to blind people. Now, you can make an argument that almost anything impacts a blind person, right? Mental health is a big topic. And mental health obviously impacts blind people, but mental health as a category of advocacy, as a systemic thing, it's mental health is not, or the need for mental health services is not, in our opinion, the direct result of blindness or society's attitudes about blindness. You could make an argument that it is, but we wouldn't take a position on some of those things. If there's a clear tie to the priorities of our organization, then we would. So it's a balancing act, and it's a constant effort of diplomacy, getting people to understand we're not working against the interest of other people with disabilities. We're working for the interest of blind people as a class. And we coordinate so that we don't step on other people's advocacy efforts. The autonomous vehicle space is a good example. We're quite happy with the collaboration we have with the industry around autonomous vehicles. A lot of people with disabilities are not, because the issue of physical access to vehicles, how are you going to get a wheelchair into one of these vehicles, is a big deal. And a lot of the manufacturers aren't talking about it. Now, it's not that we're not interested in it. It's just that's not a primary concern for blind people. So we don't ignore it. We encourage those folks to go talk to the disability organizations about it, but it's not our primary advocacy point. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. And actually, I had many questions, but I should stop. Only I ask lastly. We know that you had an election last week, and it was a very long election. We watched it. It lasted too much. Then, for example, in Turkey, in election processes, we have fight very much a problem with confidential election, because there is no electronic voting system, unfortunately, in Turkey. We have to cast our ballots in envelope, and like that, there is a ballot, and we have to use it, and we prepared a ballot template for that, like that. But we know that there is an electronic system in US. Actually, there are many things. There are mailing systems and other things, but what about the blind people? How can you cast your votes?
Yeah. We had an election? I didn't notice. No, just kidding. Well, so voting is something that we have worked on through the entire history of the Federation. Obviously, it's a hot topic this year, but it's something that we have long worked on. A little history over the years, we've fought for incremental changes in the voting laws. It used to be that if a blind person went to vote, you would have one person from each of the major political parties who would go into the voting booth with you, and they would have to watch how you voted. So you didn't have a secret vote by any means.
More than one person.
Yeah, well, you'd have one person from the Democratic Party and one person from the Republican Party, and they'd go watch you. So we fought, first of all, to get it so that a blind person could could take a person of their choosing into the polling booth to fill out the ballot for you, under the idea that you could then make a choice if you trusted the person you were going to take. But it's better than some stranger you don't know. And that was a significant step forward. Then some places in America started to implement various versions of accessible paper ballots, sometimes a Braille ballot, sometimes a Braille template that would be placed over the print ballot that you could mark.
Yeah, like us, yeah.
Yeah. In 2000, which until this year was the most infamous U.S. election, we had issues with voting, and that ushered in a law called the Help America Vote Act, in which polling places were required to have an electronic voting machine. We got into the law that at least one voting machine in every polling place had to be accessible, fully accessible. And we specifically got blind people, non-visual access into the law. And so starting with the 2004 presidential election, we had great access in a lot of places because we had electronic voting machines. What happened over the decade after 2004 is the machines started to get older, and this idea that the machines are worse than paper, there was a whole movement that we have to go back to paper ballots because paper is more secure. Even though there's no truth in the idea that paper is more secure, it's a myth. So we have been trying to make sure that we keep accessible electronic voting machines in local polling places. At the same time, we said, there are other ways to vote. If you're in the military and you're out of state, when an election comes, you can apply to vote absentee, and they oftentimes will mail you a ballot that you can mail in. And in some states, you don't even have to give a reason why you want to vote absentee. You just say, I want to vote absentee, and they'll send you a ballot. So we said in the state of Maryland here that blind people should have an accessible way to vote absentee. The state said, no, you can vote at a polling place, and we're only required under the law to give you one way to vote, not give you access to every way to vote. We fought that in the courts, and we won. And so in the state of Maryland, as an example, if you're a blind person, you can vote, you can apply to vote absentee. And in Maryland, that means if you're a blind person, you get a ballot that's delivered to you electronically. And you can mark the ballot on your computer. And then you still have to print the ballot and send it back. So that's the only downside, is you still have to print it, you have to sign it, and you have to put it in an envelope and send it back. We haven't yet got to the point of having electronic submission of ballots. However, and so that was a good step though, right? So we got accessibility in the actual polling places or in absentee voting. Last year, we sent a letter to all of the states saying the 2020 election is coming. You should make sure you have an accessible way for blind people to vote through the mail. and mostly nobody listened to us. Except what happened? Well, we got hit with a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah,
and every state in March of this year started panicking about having mail-in ballots. And we said, well, we told you 6 months ago, 7 months ago, that you should prepare for this. So a lot of the states didn't. So we started a huge effort this year to get the mail-in ballots in the United States to be accessible. And I believe that this year, more blind people than ever before have voted in elections because of the National Federation of the Blind. Now, it's still not perfect. A lot of times the ballots are delivered as PDF files that you have to mark on your computer. And I think in all cases, except for one of our 50 states, you still have to mail the ballot back. Only one state allows electronic submission of votes. So we're collecting data now on what has happened, the experience that blind voters have. It's
Mark, is the PDF accessible for marking at this?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I can mark with my screen reader. It is possible.
Yes. Yeah. That's one of our requirements, definitely. And we have sued some states over providing PDF ballots that are not accessible. So our goal is independently fillable secret ballot. And we keep moving toward the greatest independence possible. Where we'd like to get to in the next presidential election would be that the whole process will be accessible, including being able to submit the ballot electronically so that, you don't even have to sign it. In the US, there's a big focus on whether your signature matches the signature they have on file. And, that just doesn't make sense in 2020.
I think this also slows down the accounting process in this year. It takes many days to result. Okay. Mark, thank you for your, maybe do you have something to add, or can we take questions from our attendees?
I'm happy to take questions. I think I've shared the things you've asked me to, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Meral in the first round wants to question. Before beginning, I have question. Please insist me.
Evet, sormak istiyorum. Duyabiliyor musunuz rahat bir şekilde?
Evet, duyuyoruz. She will ask and I will translate.
İki tane sorum var. Birincisi, yeti farklılığına dayalı ayrımcılık veya sağlamcılık politik midir? Eğer biz bu mücadele alanını ideolojik bir zemine oturtacaksak nasıl bir ideolojik temel üzerine mücadeleyi inşa edebiliriz? Ve bununla birlikte yine bu bağlamda olmak üzere sormak istiyorum. Mücadelede erişilebilirlik çözümleri veya hukuki mücadelenin yanı sıra öfkeyi nerede görüyorsunuz? Ben daha sert hareket edilmesinden yanayım kişisel olarak. Ama NFB'nin bu noktadaki bakış açısı nedir öfkeye? Bunu özel olarak merak ediyorum. Hemen ikinci sorumu da sorayım. Bu biraz daha farklı bir alan. Amerika'daki diğer kör grupları veya kör kişiler NFB'nin temel felsefesine aykırı olacak şekilde hareketlerde veya söylemlerde bulunduklarında burada nasıl bir tutum sergilersiniz? Dengeyi nasıl kurarsınız? Gerekmesi halinde diğer körlerle mücadele edilmesi gerektiğini hissettiğinizde nasıl bir tavır alırsınız? Şimdilik böyle. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Ben bunları tabii çevirebilirsem. Okay, for the first question, Mark, she asked, disability blind movement she asked, is blind movement is a political fight issue or only it is an accessibility issue? And she asked, how do you make some changes in political issue? What do you think about? Do we have to fight for our rights, or do we have to demonstrate, or persuasion is enough. What do you think about that? Firstly, I can't ask that question. For example, do you have some demonstration, walking, other things, or are you lobbying or try to persuade? And which way is useful according to you?
All of them are necessary, and it depends on the stage of development you're at. You know, for us. We had a significant period of time where we were hosting demonstrations, on a monthly basis around certain issues. We were in the streets a lot in the 1970s and 1980s as blind people, pushing back on agencies for the blind. We're at a mature point as a people's movement now where we don't need to do that as regularly. But we do that. And we also use other tools. I think all of the tools are necessary and you need to be prepared to use them. And sometimes you need to use something like a demonstration to make a very firm, strong statement. And when you can turn people out for a demonstration, it makes a difference. Some people think that doing something like a demonstration is counterproductive to having conversations, and that's just not true. I'm sure you all know about the Amazon Corporation.
Yeah,
they're a big deal here in the U.S., so I know you know about them. And they started coming out with electronic books, I think in 2007.
Kindle.
Yeah, and we said to them, you have a tremendous opportunity if you make these books fully accessible to blind people from the beginning. You'll lead the nation. You'll be doing something no one else is doing yet, and you'll make a huge statement, and you'll sell a lot of books, and you'll lead the way on accessibility. And we offered to work with them, and they ignored us. And we asked them to make their devices accessible, and they ignored us. So we put a group together, and we had a protest outside of their headquarters on the middle of December in Seattle, Washington. It was rainy, it was cold, but it got their attention, and it got them to start talking to us. They still weren't moving very fast. And so they put in a contract with the State Department to put Kindles in all of the libraries around the world. And this was something like a $21 million contract. And we got Secretary Clinton to cancel that contract because we wrote letters saying, this is not accessible. You can't give them this contract. It's a violation of federal law. Then they went to one of the largest school districts in the country, New York City, and they were going to get a $30 million contract to deliver educational content in New York City. And we wrote to the school board in New York City and said, this is a mistake. You'll be violating the law, shutting all blind students out, and we are going to show up and protest your meeting. 24 hours before the protest, we had buses paid for, we had people coming in. They canceled consideration of the contract, and they told Amazon that they should talk to us. And the result there was that we got an agreement with Amazon to work on accessibility. Now, I firmly believe, had we not threatened and been prepared, by the way, to show up and protest that school board meeting, that agreement with Amazon would have never happened. So
yeah,
protesting is necessary. Engaging in the politics is necessary. Now, our organization, I should say, we are not you know, we don't take political sides in the United States. We have to work with lawmakers from all parties. But as individuals within our organization, we get involved sometimes to make friends in the political process. And we do that so that the organization and our issues get known. But as an organization, we don't take a political stance. That way, because we know that we're going to have to work with whoever is in office, right? Our issues aren't just for one party. They impact all people.
Of course. And the second question is a very good question also. We know that in Turkey and US, everywhere, unfortunately, every blind people do not think like NFB philosophy. Independence is important. People's own life, own decisions are important. But some people take it in a differently. Maybe they exploit blindness as a helping agenda, other things like that, you know. There are different attitudes relying on more exploitation or more help from others, more dependency, or taking money from others, like that, many things. When there are such kind of blind, different attitudes violating your philosophy, what is your attitude, or what is your situation, position in those kind of different ideas or attitudes?
Well, I mean, that's a constant battle. You know, blind people, in order to have freedom and independence, we have to believe ourselves it's possible. And inspiring other blind people to believe it, I mean, that's the hard work, I think, sometimes. You know, we as blind people are as susceptible to believing the stereotypes about blindness as everybody else. You know, until I met the National Federation of the Blind, there were so many things I didn't even know were possible for blind people to do. I never would have thought about traveling through an airport by myself as a blind person. But when I met the Federation, I met blind people who did it, and I learned the techniques that they used, and I learned that actually they were able to move around faster independently than they were being in the care of others, because they had that freedom. And when you start to give people, show people what's possible and teach them what's possible, and it's the teaching that's really important, giving them that experience to taste that freedom. Most people, when they start to get that freedom and you surround them with a community that every day is telling them this is possible, that makes a difference. So that's why our chapters meet every month, and they're talking about these issues every month. And sometimes it takes a long time to get that blind person off the couch and understanding that there's something more for them. But, you know, we don't want to give up on any blind person. We also don't want to be held back by blind people who just don't believe it. So the trick is remembering that we were once in that same place, right? I know I was in that place where I didn't believe blind people could do these things. And so I have to remember that, you know, the way to bring them along is to continue to talk with them and show them what's possible. But it's a tough problem.
Yeah. Thank you. But maybe before going to other questions, from that position, Fatos abla, are you here still? Maybe we can give a speech. Maybe if you can speak English for the translation for Mark. You are working on Oklahoma Department of Rehabilitation Service. Can you mention about what is that rehabilitation center doing? Maybe now from the point Mark lives on, because you have to teach blind people independence and something he said. Maybe you can say something about that point.
Sure. So each state, according to the federal law, each state in United States needs to provide services to all people with disabilities, and blind individuals is of course one of them. So each state delivers this service with the agencies, service providers, and they deliver differently. So when I was working in Nebraska, for example, Nebraska had a separate agency for the blind that provided services only to blind individuals. So there were two agencies. There was a blind agency and there was a separate agency for any other disability. In Oklahoma, we have one agency and two different branches of the same agency. So I work with both. I provide services in the employment area, both for the blind individuals and also with any other disability.
Very good. Thank you Fatos abla. Maybe if you wish, whenever you wish, you can attend to us.
Ben mikrofonu açtım. Sesim
Bir
geliyor mu?
dakika Habi bir dakika. Please. Ben soruları alacağım. Önce ilk olarak Oğuz sormuş. Sonra Can. Sonra Habil sormuş. Önce Oğuz Akkaya'dan alayım. Mikrofonu açtık. Yani o sırayla gideceğiz. Önce Oğuz, sonra Can, sonra Habil'i gördüm.
If you want, I can speak in English.
Okay, Oğuz. Okay, of course.
Hi, Mark and Fatos Floyd. It's a good pleasure to have you here, and I want to thank the Engelsiz Erişim and Engin Yılmaz for this meeting. Actually, I wrote my question to the chat area, but now we are experiencing a pandemic. So, we need some accommodations. Of course, we can make accommodations by ourselves, but, sometimes some institutions have responsibilities about this kind of accommodations, for example, accessibility issues. But now they don't care about us. Of course, Mark talked, as Mark mentioned, when he talked about voting system, pandemic sometimes provides us with some opportunities. How do you see blindness under pandemic conditions, under such conditions? How do you experience pandemic in the USA?
That's a good question. Well, first thing I would say is that it is a real important time for us to come together as blind people. In the United States, certainly it has afforded people an opportunity to talk about rolling back rights that we already have in society and using the pandemic as an excuse to do so. The Americans with Disabilities Act has been under attack for some years by those who believe, especially that they are being asked to do too much, even though the act was passed 30 years ago, to make their places of public accommodation accessible. Now, usually that means physical access, but closely tied to that is access to websites, which of course is a primary interest for blind people. So we have had to make sure that we are paying attention to the bills that are being offered, and that we push back on those bills to say this is not a time to diminish our rights. The second thing is, in the United States, it's been an opportunity for us to reach out to more blind people because we've been able to take what we do virtually. And I know you all in your association have a strong virtual presence. So
Yes.
you are already well
Mark,
positioned to do that.
just a minute. Maybe our translator may tired of. Please change the translator. Okay, go on, Mark.
So,
Yes, this is a good
so that
opportunity.
reaching out has been a real opportunity. You know, the rules, well, you know, for blind people, the big thing in the United States has been getting access to information about the pandemic, and then also getting equal access to testing. In a lot of states, they have created these drive-up testing centers, and of course, that works unless you're a person who doesn't drive. And so we've been advocating with states to develop systems for deploying testing, COVID testing, to people if they don't drive. But we have used it as an opportunity to connect more blind people together and to really redouble our efforts on protecting our civil rights. It has opened up a lot of great conversations about the techniques that blind people use and sharing techniques. If you follow any of the internet traffic, I'm sure you found a number of our virtual events that you can drop in on, our state conventions or enrichment events. So the beauty of it is we're reaching a lot more people. There's a lot we don't know about how society is going to be altered for some time. And we're still learning and writing about that, right? Some people are very, very concerned about how do you know if you're staying 6 feet away from somebody? Well, my experience is if you get too close, just tell me, just tell me I'm not 6 feet away. If I'm making you uncomfortable, tell me. I'm going to tell you if I'm uncomfortable. Some people worry a lot about blind people touching surfaces. And, I would say, hopefully this is a lesson that as blind people, we touch things. So we should always be very mindful of the fact that in doing so, we may be picking up germs, and that's not new, right? So I think, though, we know that by following the basic rules, most people stay safe in the pandemic. And I think we just need to make sure that blind people aren't forced to put themselves in situations that are dangerous. Going back to having to sign things, we've pushed back on federal government agencies that require a physical signature because we've said, well, for a blind person or for someone who has a physical disability, that means you have to expose yourself to someone else who can help you find the line that you need to sign. And it's just for a signature. It doesn't make sense that I have to expose myself to someone else and potentially the virus just because you want a wet ink signature when there are other ways to verify who I am.
Of course. Mark, just a moment, John, before John.
Okay, John 20 enter. Utility, voice assistant, sub memo, sound card, Windows, compartment 2 USB audio, compartment 2 connection, smart audio HDH.
Okay, John, please continue. Can konuşamadı. Habil, you can talk.
Evet, sesimi alıyor musunuz?
Ediyoruz Habil, evet. We are hearing you.
Evet, Türkçe soruyorum.
Sor.
Önce şöyle söyleyerek başlayayım. Eğer Türkiye'de araba kullanma adına test yapmak istiyorsanız ben
Ali,
buradayım.
Faruk
Ben böyle bir
üzerine
şey
konuşma
şimdiden gönüllüyüm.
bence. Duyuyoruz biz onu.
Ve şunu sormak istiyorum. Bunu söyledikten sonra. Şimdi bizim sesli dergilerimiz var. İnternet dergilerimiz de var. Mesela bizim dergi var. Ben de o dergide yazıyorum. Ve orada genelde deneyimlerimizi paylaşıyoruz o dergilerde. Ben çok yaparım. Deneyim paylaşım yazıları çok yazarım. Diğer arkadaşlar da yazıyorlar. Körlükle alakalı birçok şeyi yazıyoruz. Hatta Elif Emir Öksüz'ün tanıyor musunuz? Bilmiyorum. Elif Emir Öksüz'ün
Abi hızlı kısaca.
NFB ile alakalı bir yazısı da dergi vasıtasıyla biz tanıdık. Sormak istediğim husus şu. Orada dergicilik nasıl oluyor? Sesli dergi ya da internet dergisi ya da Braille dergi, körlükle alakalı. Buradaki dergilerden haberdar mısınız? Ya da hangi ülkedeki dergilerden haberdarsınız? Bunu soracaktım.
Buradakilerden haberi yoktur ama diğerini soralım istersen abi. Okay, he asked about we have many journals in Turkey related to blindness issue. There are some journals. For example, we have also a journal. It is called Equal, Accessible and Barrier-Free Life, the name of our journal. And we have Habil also and Meral maybe in the first one, and me also are some of the authors of that. And what kind of journals are there in USA for NFB? For example, I know JVIB, I know other kind of journals. Can you mention about your magazines about
Yes.
blind?
Yeah, there are three primary ones. First of all, the Braille Monitor, which, and all of these again can be found at our website, nfb.org. The Braille Monitor is our flagship publication. We've been publishing it since 1957. It's a monthly magazine that chronicles our history, but also talks about contemporary issues. You can get it online. You can also get the audio online. We do offer sending the hard copy to people in foreign nations, but we do ask you to pay for it. So it's free online. So you can go to our website and look up the Braille Monitor, and all of these are under our publications tab. We also
have you found all of the things since 1957, Mark? Is it possible?
Almost. We're not. We have digitized everything back to 1957.
Oh.
I don't think all of it is on the website just yet. We're adding more and more of it all the time. But there's a ton of content there. At least 50 years of it is there. So it'll keep you busy for a while. And that comes out. By the way, you can also get that sent to you via email on a monthly basis. Then, as you say, we do have the Journal of Blindness, Innovation and Research. That is our peer-reviewed journal. It's available on our website. It's open access. In the field of blindness in the United States, before we established this journal, the professional journal that was out there is called the Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness. It did not include the perspective of blind people. You had to pay to get it. And the research that was published was really not authentic to blind people.
Mark, is it still alive? Because I utilize it very much in my academic research, but I am not sure it is still published or not, JVIB.
It's hanging on by a thread. It's hanging on. And by the way, we would welcome submissions to our journal, the Journal of Blindness, Innovation and Research, from all around the world. So that's a powerful tool. Then we also publish, along with a partner of ours, a publication called Future Reflections, which is intended for educators and parents of blind children. And that is a quarterly publication. Again, it's available on our website, and it has articles in the education space mostly.
Also, Mark, can you talk a little bit about Kernel Books? I think that really was an interesting project.
So we also have a lot of other literature on our website. I mentioned our 50th anniversary book. We have a book that we published for our 75th anniversary. We also have a series of books called the Kernel Books, which we published for a number of years, 15 to 16 years. And these are books with short stories written by blind people about their experience. They were intended to be books that were passed out to the general public. So they're stories written by blind people to help create understanding about the experience of blindness. They're also very relevant to blind people, though, again, in terms of helping those blind people who don't yet have a positive philosophy about blindness really come to understand what's possible for them.
A very good experience sharing. I think our festival now, you are in the, we are hosting you as a result of our White Cane and Accessibility Festival, as I said right before, Mark. And we also shared many blindness experiences in that festival. For example, we will be online stands after Friday. And so it was a very pleasure to hear you such kind of kernels. Maybe I will read them. I will maybe sometimes if we translate them, it would be very better. People, are there anyone who raise hand? Soru sormak isteyen var mı arkadaşlar? Mithat galiba sen soracaktın.
Benim de var.
Hello.
Mithat.
First, thanks for coming. Can students in the USA have comfortable access to Braille displays?
Yeah, very good question.
Well, thank you.
How can we obtain Braille displays in? Government is providing them, or I have to purchase like that? Maybe Mithat wants to ask something.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question and thanks for having me. In the United States, Braille displays are not widely distributed yet. We're on the verge of it. Many people get Braille displays from the rehabilitation system, which was mentioned earlier. The National Library Service is currently undertaking a pilot project to look at distributing Braille displays to blind people. I actually have one at my house right now. I think the pilot project is only a couple hundred units. The hope is that they will then, after they've investigated the potential of doing it, will make Braille displays available to thousands of blind people across the country. We expect to help go to Congress and ask for money to do that. So we think we're on the edge of getting there, but right now, mostly Braille displays are purchased by individuals or through support from rehabilitation programs. And there's a need to get more Braille displays out to people.
We have also very need to. That's very good. Evet arkadaşlar, kız çocuk kimlerin vardı? Kızlar.
Can Kırıkçı'nın var ama mikrofon izni bekliyormuş.
Mikrofonu ben onu açmıştım aslında.
Ben de el kaldırdım, sonrasında da ben alabilir miyim söz?
Bir dakika arkadaşlar.
Çağrı Artan da var.
Aslında Can'a ben demin söz verdim ama açmadım. Bakayım. Tekrar söz verdim. Evet, şimdi Can açabilirsen mikrofonu. Çağrı sen orada soracaksın.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Mark. Just would like to ask a question back into Amazon. You said that in 2007 you have tried to, talk with Amazon to make the Kindle accessible, but you said that you have ignored. But today, I know that Amazon running a project called Smile, So it allows you to, or allows us to, donate the 0.5% of eligible purchase to selected charitable thing, and NFP is included. Just asking, what was the change in USA? What is the break point to, change their mind completely?
I'm so sorry. Interpretation tarafında çeviri gelmedi ve kayda giriyor record olduğu için. Soruyu bir de Türkçe alabilir miyiz?
Can Türkçe'de soruyor.
Tabii ki soruyorum.
İngilizce sorarlarsa çevirin. Çevirmen arkadaşlar. Türkçe sorarsa çevirmeyin. Evet, tamam. Can
Aşk olsun, beni çevirmiyor musunuz?
Evet.
Şimdi 2007 yılında Kindle'ları erişilebilir hale getirmek için Amazon'a talep götürdüklerini ama Amazon'un bunu reddettiğini söylediler. Fakat şu an günümüzde yaptığınız alışverişlerin 0.5'lik tabii ki kabul edilebilir olanlarının seçili kurum ve kuruluşlara, özellikle non-profit olan yani derneklere bağış olarak sunulduğu ve ciddi paralar ödendiğini söylüyor Amazon. Smile adında bir proje. Hatta 2017'de sanıyorum katılmıştım ben Smile'a. Şu an siz de giriş yaptığınızda size soruyor Amerika'dan alışveriş yaparken yaptığın alışverişin bir kısmını bağış olarak sunmak ister misin diye. Ben de NFB'yi seçmiştim bildiğim için. Ben de şunu sordum. Yani bir zamanlar bu görüşü yani bir şeyleri erişilebilir hale getirmek için reddeden firma gerçekten ne değişti de şu an bütün organizasyonlara yardım edebilme kararı aldı ki NFB de bunlardan bir tanesi.
Thank you, Can. He also translated in Turkish. Yeah, Mark, you can answer.
Well, I don't think they have gotten to the breaking point yet. Amazon has made some progress, but you know we're actively suing Amazon even today. Kindle's better. A lot of us can read Kindle books now.
No, I think maybe a little to a degree.
It's better than it was. The website is marginal, but a lot of us are able to purchase stuff on Amazon. Not perfect. As an employer, Amazon is horrible. A lot of the Amazon jobs in the United States are in warehouses doing manual work. They won't let blind people in. We've sued them over this and won a number of times now. So it's a constant battle. Now, you point out that we do participate in Amazon Smile, and that's an interesting philosophical question that we always face. You know, we could stay out of Amazon Smile, and people are still going to purchase stuff on Amazon, and we're still going to sue them. So the question is, should we get a little bit of money from Amazon to help us sue them, or should we take a strong stance and say we're not going to participate in anything Amazon does? It's a tough call, and because we've had some productive conversation with Amazon, we've decided to get involved with them, but it's a tough call. So I don't think they're to the breaking point yet. I don't think they really recognize blind people as a serious constituency across the board.
Maybe it comes from my imagine because...
Tamam. Başka soru var. Diyalogda gitmeyelim. Çok fazla soru var galiba. Evet. Başka.
Thank you.
Ben söz alabilir miyim?
Hızlıca çağırın. Sorularımız arkadaşlar 10 saniyeden uzun sürmesin lütfen.
Çağrı'dan sonra Olgun Yılmaz da söz istiyor.
Tamam.
Şimdi öncelikle Mark'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Burada Türkiye kör toplumunun yani Türkiye'de yaşayan körlerin hak temelli mücadelesinde çok tarihi bir gün yaşanıyor şu an. Burada
10 saniyede olmak üzere soruya gel.
Lütfen efendim. Bu anın keyfini çıkarmamıza müsaade ediniz. Ona teşekkür ediyorum. Bugün benim için bir tarihi bir gün çünkü bu hak temelli mücadeleyi ülkemizde paralelde yürüten çok az oluşum var. Engelsiz erişim de onlardan birisi. Benim de üye olduğum. Şimdi sorum az önce tam da o bağış ve bir şeylerin içerisine girme noktasında yani herhangi bir iktisadi işletmeyle ortaklık ya da bir kuruma danışmanlık verme ya da bir kurumla ortak olarak farklı bir kurumun erişilebilirlik sorununu çözme gibi noktalarda bağımsız kalabileceklerine inanıyorlar mı? Yani mesela dava açabiliyoruz. Aynı zamanda oradan gelen paraları da alabiliyoruz dendi. Biz bunun sorunsalını yaşadık yakın zamanda. Hani bunun kendilerindeki karşılığı ne? Aslında sormak istediğim temelde bu. Daha farklı şeyler de var.
Çağrı continues from the point where John left off, Mark. It's an interesting and good question. Yeah, you can take money from some institutions and maybe do you have some institutions, for example, for accessible, to make some websites accessible other than if you have such kind of economic or financial relations with those companies, like maybe taking money or taking tips, like other things like that, and then how can you stay independent with if there is such kind of economic situation, or how can you solve such a dilemma?
And
Charo also thanks you about your historical day. He said he's very pleasure to say the other thing. Fatos abla, yeah.
Yeah, I want to add something else that Mark, maybe you can talk about, because since I know both countries, that how important do you think for NFB members supporting our organization? Because that doesn't happen in Turkey.
Yeah. Fatoş abla çok teşekkür ederim. O da iyi oldu arada.
Yeah, so financial independence is really important, and that is a key aspect of the National Federation of the Blind. So nobody's getting rich off of Amazon Smile, I can tell you that. I think if we get $1,000 in a year from Amazon Smile, we're lucky. We spend millions of dollars a year, so there's no problem there. But there are the economic independence is really important. Our organization is funded largely from donations from individuals and organizations, and not from the government. We get some government grants for projects, but it's only projects that we want to pursue, and it's less than 10% of our budget. So, and partly we don't get government grants because we're still going to tell the government what to do. And we have a firm handle on that. I think developing economic independence is important as an organization. We do not take dollars from entities that we feel we can't have some degree of working with, but we're also very clear when we take donations, especially sponsorships for our national convention, that that does not mean you're buying our policy decision authority. So there are many examples where we have had sponsors at our national convention, and at the same convention, we're passing a resolution telling that sponsor that they're not getting it right. and it does make people mad. They do think that because they're a sponsor that you're going to treat them differently. Now, what I tell people is your friends are the ones that you expect are going to tell you the truth. And if you want to be our friend, we're going to tell you the truth, which means we're not always going to tell you that things are good. We're going to tell you the truth. But a big part of what makes that possible is that our members contribute dollars to our organization on a monthly basis. And even when they don't have a lot of money, our members recognize that a little bit of money every month when we all work together gives us enough money to have some independence in running our programs. And
how many members do you have, Mark, in America?
Oh, that's a great question. We have about 50,000 members. Now, we have many, many more blind people who actively benefit on a yearly basis from our program than that. Members, we really count members as people who pay dues and who are actively working in the organization as a volunteer. We have a lot of blind people who sit on the sideline and benefit and don't participate. We don't call them members, although they do utilize our free services. And, some of them actually do make financial contributions. There are a lot of blind people that recognize, even though they're not active, that what we do makes a difference.
Very good. Okay. Şimdi çocuklar kimde sıra? Olgun abi de istedi ama ondan önce parmak kaldıranlar var mı kızlar? Çocuklar.
Mürşide
var.
Tamam. Önce Mürşide, sonra Olgun abime alalım.
Elif'i duyamıyor musunuz?
Ha, Elif de var. Tamam.
Evet,
Elif,
ben
şimdi,
deminden beri bağırıyorum.
özür dilerim. Şimdi Mürşide, Elif ve Olgun abim sırasıyla ilerliyoruz. Mürşide. Pardon. Şimdi konuşabilirsin. Mürşide şimdi konuşabilirsin. Ses gelmiyor. Mürşide. Elif sen sorar mısın o arada? Mürşide'yi açtım ama ondan sonra o sorsun.
Tamam. Duyuyorsunuz değil mi?
Evet.
Ben Meral'in sorusunu birazcık aslında devam ettirmek istiyorum. Başka körler eğer şey yapmazsa, inanmazsa ne yapıyorsunuz gibi bir şey sormuştu. Ve siz de dediniz ki yani onlara göstermek lazım. Ama ve biz hani en çok anladığım sizin yasa koyucularla, yasa uygulayıcılarla ve kör olmayanlarla mücadele ettiğinizi anlıyorum sözlerinizden. Yani biz ülkemizde bütün bunların yanı sıra aynı zamanda körlerle de ciddi bir direnç yaşıyoruz. Yani bu sadece masum bir ben yapamam inancından çok bu yapılmamalıdır gibi bir şeyle mücadele etmek zorunda kalıyoruz. Amerika'da böyle bir mücadele alanınız yok mu? Yoksa vardı da nasıl aştınız? Bunu merak ediyorum.
Engin, can I translate this one?
Okay.
Mark?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
I think I think the question is you got similar question before, Mark. They're asking, you know, the struggles that we as an organization with politicians and maybe the policy, but how do we deal with other organizations maybe that have a totally different philosophy than we do, instead of accepting handouts, for example, that some organization will promote. How do we deal with those organizations or those philosophies?
Yeah, I think staying true.
Because in Turkey there are many, Mark. There are many things, and we have to fight with those organizations too. In addition to the organization from the government, lawmaker, other things, but there are also many different.
Çünkü hükümet onları dinliyor. Onu da ekleyelim de.
Yeah, and government likes them more. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, yeah, that's a part of the struggle. We have that in the United States too, maybe not as many organizations. Many organizations claim to represent blind people. So I think being true to being an authentic blind run organization and, you know, having that be the focus, because probably a lot of those other organizations aren't run by blind people in a substantial way. And then the second thing is, you know, it is part of the battle. You know, in the United States, we have an organization that exists because it split off from our organization now, 60 years ago almost? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it has a different worldview than we have. And we think our worldview empowers blind people. And so we have to contend with that. We have to know that that's part of the landscape. We could get a lot more done if we didn't have other organizations, you know, getting in the way. What the problem that we face is that sometimes people want to treat the organizations like equals, and we make it very clear we're not equals. You know, we have in numbers, in participation, in reach across the country, our organization, there is no other organization like ours. And so you can't treat us equally. But I mean, navigating the politics of your own country and that sort of thing, I think you just have to be strategic and find those opportunities to assert the independence and unique brand that you have.
Yeah, and I think the difference, the big difference is between Turkey and United States is that in United States we have only two major blindness, well, one major and one minor blindness organization. You know, NFB is the largest organization, and American Council of the Blind is the breakout from that. But if I remember correctly, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, in Istanbul, there were 36 blindness organizations.
Maybe more. Maybe
yeah,
more.
maybe, yeah. I mean, so that's the difference between, I think, United States and Turkey.
Now, I mean, find a way to take them over. That's what I say. Now, we do have, we do have, at least the ones that you can, we do have, you know, we do have hundreds of agencies for the blind, which sometimes act like membership organizations.
Yes.
So, so there is that. Now, I just want to note, I'm happy to keep answering questions. I do have a call in about 10 minutes that I had scheduled. So, yeah.
Of course. Sorry. Last questions. Müşide? Müşide sonra alamadık. Yazabilirsin istersen Müşide WhatsApp'tan veya birine biz sorabiliriz. Mikrofonunu açamıyorsun. O zaman
geliyor mu sesim şimdi?
Evet, hızlı, çok hızlı. Evet, geliyor.
Tamam. Benim de iki sorum olacak. Bir, şu anki ekran okuyucuların mevcut halleri hakkında ne düşünüyorlar? Yani bana sanki birazcık geride kalıyorlar gibi geliyor geliştirilmesiyle ilgili. Bir de biz hep kendi aramızda konuşuyoruz. Kör pilot olmanın mevcut programları kullanmaktan daha kolay olduğunu düşünüyorum. Yani bununla ilgili hiç hayal kuruldu mu ya da bir deneme yapıldı mı? Bunu sorarsanız sevinirim.
She has interesting two questions. The first one is related to ne sormuştun ya?
Screen readers.
What is the Turkey? We had a discussion about the screen readers. Sometimes we know that screen readers have low performance to conform with all of the newly added programs or websites or other things, especially related to job-related area. What do you think about the works of screen readers as a whole? And secondly, an interesting question: do you tried blind driver? Have you also tried blind pilot?
So screen readers.
Maybe it might be easier.
Yeah. Screen readers. So I missed the screen reader question. So what exactly is the question about screen readers?
She thinks that sometimes they might be enough to deal with all the problems in some issues. What do you think about their development?
Well, I think it's important that we continue as blind people to give real feedback to screen reader developers, and this includes now the major corporations, right? I mean, Apple has built in their screen reader. Microsoft is working hard on Narrator. Google has TalkBack. I would say none of those products are great. Apple's maybe the best because it's most well developed, but we know that every time Apple comes out with a new version of its operating system, the Braille implementation gets messed up. Mm-hmm. So there's an advocacy effort there that's needed. Also with the third-party products, which oftentimes include more blind developers in their development work. There's a constant feedback loop I think we need to provide as blind people. I think we're getting closer to a time where these technologies are built in, but you know, it's of benefit that we have people that are providing authentic expertise, whether it's NVDA or JAWS, that we have blind developers working on these systems, but we need to keep giving feedback about what doesn't work. It's complicated today because sometimes it's the screen reader and sometimes it's the operating system. And we need to figure out a way to get those two to work more together. to the question about flying airplanes, we do think flying an airplane is actually easier. Airplanes already have a lot of the technology, and when they're in the air, there's not too much to hit. It's just the landing and taking off that's important, and the only problem there is you probably only get one shot. We do think it's something that is doable. We would love to see development happen in that area. We have not decided to spend dollars in that area, but we have looked at some program to teach people how to fly and how to get instruments to be accessible. It's not a primary program, but we think it's interesting. We think it's actually easier than the motor vehicle in many ways.
Okay, last brief questions. Fatos abla buyur.
Barbara Miles from England, totally blind, and he pilots macro planes with using JAWS.
Interesting. Maybe I will take the information from it.
Sure.
Olgun abi hızlıca.
I have a question too.
Arkadaşlar
Sorayım mı
oradan
sorumu?
abi bitmek üzere. Olgun abi alayım.
Ha, okay.
Soruyorum. Amerika'da televizyonlarda özellikle yani televizyon yayınlarında sesli betimleme çalışmaları hizmeti nasıl yürüyor?
Evet, Olgun is asking with our another project. What about the audio descriptions in movies or televisions in USA? Is there any development or what it is common?
It's more and more common. There are some laws that provide some requirements. It's not as common as you would like, probably. The television standard for audio description is still quite minimal. The industry is, to some degree, still resistant about it. But you're seeing more and more description every day. All of the major online content providers are providing description. Netflix, Amazon, Apple. So I think, we're seeing a lot more description being put out there. I think the biggest problem is that description is not yet viewed as simply part of the artistic process. What we really want to get to is that the folks that are writing scripts should be writing the audio description track, and it can really be an artistic enhancement to the work that they're doing. But as an organization, we have tried to prioritize that while description is important, we need access first and foremost to emergency weather information, news, some of these things that show up as a scrolling text on the bottom of a screen while you're watching television. And we think those things are more important than entertainment, but we need both. We need more of both, and we're seeing more and more every day.
Mark, thank you a lot for answering all of our questions. There are many questions, but we spend your time too much. Sorry about that. But thank you. You joined us. You accepted our invitation, and you had a very good speech. And maybe we also, Association of Barrier-Free Access, have very similar philosophy with you. We are working since 2005, and we have many things related to audio description, related to public transportation accessibility, related to voting accessibility, ATM accessibility, and our philosophy is also make blind people more independent by doing all of things. And I was very happy. I am very happy to hear that our philosophies are so similar. And I would like to also thank Fatos abla to you also very much
Bir şey değil.
And do you have anything else to add, Mark?
Well, the only thing I would say is I would encourage you to keep up the good fight. I think having an organization that is driven by blind people, authentically driven by blind people, where blind people determine for ourselves what needs to happen, where we share and build a philosophy and understanding of blindness that's authentic to us, even if people around us don't believe it, is important. And I know that although you all are very young as an organization in this effort, I want you to know it's worth it. It's not always easy, but it's the right thing to do. You're free to soak up any of what we've published at nfb.org and to use the information there to help build your organization in terms of thinking about blindness. And we'd love to continue to know what you're doing and to share what we're doing. We appreciate the spirit and determination that you're putting into your efforts. And we would also encourage you all to stay safe. And hopefully one of these days we can gather together in person to share ideas.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Fatos abla, can you also add something before ending the stream session?
Sure. I think involvement with, NFB and Turkey, it goes long ways back. Dr. Jernigan had an opportunity to come to Istanbul, and so also we didn't do it under NFB, but all NFB members, we came for 3 times to Turkey and did some training. So really there is a lot to learn from the efforts of collective movement in United States. And it is really wonderful to see all of you young individuals that, carrying the message for the future. And really, Turkey needs you guys.
Thank you very much. And Mark and Fatos abla, thank you a lot. And I am now ending the session. Çağrı, if you wish, you can stop the record. I am stopping the live stream. Thank you a lot.